that. Right? We're not gonna touch it. All right, so the magic day for all of us. I know when NAR first came out with this settlement, the date was August 17th. But CRMLS and California Association of Realtors has chosen August 13th. Why? I don't know. But so all of these changes go into effect August 13th. If you currently have listings and you are using the listing agreement that is dated prior to 12/23 or prior, you need to have this form, the disclosure modification to listing agreement, filled out and signed by your seller on all your listing agreements that are 12/23 version or earlier. And basically what this form does, it modifies the current listing agreement and removes the offer of compensation to the buyer's broker. So before, when we have a listing agreement, obviously we put the total number of compensation to be paid in the first section. The second section below, it told what you were going to pay the cooperating broker. That is now removed from the listing agreement. And this form right here, if you see this right here, modifies and takes out the compensation to the buyer's broker. So any current listings that are not in escrow, you will need this. Not in escrow.
This includes lease listings?
If it's in escrow, by August 13th, the contract's already negotiated, everything's already been in play. So, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, what about like lease listings?
Leases do not fall under this new rule at all, okay? This is just single-family residence, mobile homes, all that kind of good stuff, not leases. So there's no buyer-broker agreement for a lease, there's nothing like that. But there is something else I'll show you at the end. So this is the form that you will need. The next one, if you already currently have a buyer-broker agreement with somebody, after August 13th, that buyer-broker agreement is no longer the correct verbiage. This is the disclosure and modification to the old buyer-broker agreement to make it comply with the new one, okay? So this is the form you will need to modify your current buyer-broker agreement if it is dated 12/22 or earlier, okay? So the next thing we're gonna get into is the fun buyer-broker agreement. So, as you can see, this section right here, A1 and A2. So A1 here talks about the representation period. A buyer-broker agreement cannot be longer than a 3-month period. That is the way CAR has written the form. They are doing this to protect a buyer and not have an agent lock them in for an extended period of time. It is not currently law that it is 3 months, but it will be signed into legislation on January of 2025. So CAR is just kind of getting ahead of things and making us used to what the law is going to be in January, so they've already included that on their buyer broker agreement. Now, there are 3 types of people that do not comply to the 3 months. It doesn't apply to them. One, of course. Okay. First one is if it's a corporation, the 3-month period does not apply. If it's an LLC, the 3-month period does not apply. Or if it's a partnership. So those are the 3 types of buyers that the 3 months do not apply to. Okay, A2. A2 is type of representation. The default for the buyer-broker agreement is non-exclusive. So it does not tie them to you unless it's for a specific property. So it means if you showed them the property and you initiated the deal with the buyer, then this ties them to the buyer-broker agreement. It is not exclusive. Whereas if they went to somewhere else and some other agent showed them a different property, you're not tied to that transaction. The buyer-broker agreement doesn't apply to that transaction. It only applies to things that you have broker involvement in. So if you would like it to be an exclusive agreement where it ties the buyer to you regardless of who they buy a property with, then you would need to check tick the box on A2 right here that says exclusive. Not only do you have to check that box, on page 5 at the top here, you will see they also have to initial this section, making it exclusive. So you have to have both of those items in order to make it an exclusive contract. Okay? So that means the buyer can go to any property with any agent and they still owe you a commission. Okay? So let's go back. All right. So let's go back to page 1. Now the next thing here, B1. B1 has to have something checked, okay? And B2, these are important. If something is not filled in either of those, then your buyer broker agreement is void. So you have to say what type of property is that they're looking for, and you have to give some description of where they're looking. You can put LA County, Orange County, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be specific with cities, but it has to have an area of where they're looking for a property. Now there is a form, I know, another form that takes that a little bit further, and that is the, let's see which form it is. The buyer identification of preferences and properties. This is not mandatory, but it does call that out in the buyer broker agreement. So if you, when you meet your buyer for the first time and you're getting your buyer broker agreement filled out, want to sit down with the client and have them telling you a little bit of what they're looking for in a property, this would be the form to use. Not mandatory, but checking the box. It says on the first page, it's the buyer broker agreement right here with the property type and location, that is mandatory. But if you'd like to take it a little further, you can use the other form as well.
In B1, it looks like it defaults to single-family residence.
Yes, it does default to single-family residence, but if there's some other type of property, you would check the box. Yes, correct.
But we should always check the box on the property area, the following specific property.
You have to, yes, correct. Always check the box of counties, cities, you have to just have something in.
And it says specified properties, but can you write in the city of Anaheim?
It's not a specific property, it's just a location. It's just asking for locations of where they're looking.
Got it.
So you can't put the
California.
state of California. Sorry. Now y'all have thought about it, you can't do it. Right? So you do have to specify, like I said, you can put counties, LA County, Orange County. It doesn't have to be that specific, but you do have to be somewhat specific. Okay? And then the form that talked about additional preferences, the BIPP, this is where it's referenced here. So if you're gonna have your buyer fill that out, you would check that box. It'll auto-populate in your buyer broker agreement package, and you can fill out more buyer preferences if you like. Okay? Now we get to the good stuff. Compensation. So this part right here, amount of compensation, is the amount of money that you are charging your buyer for your services. So this is where we become salespeople and sell ourselves, right? This is why I deserve this amount of money. And as always, we always have to say, commissions are negotiable. That's the big red flag with this new NAR settlement is commissions are negotiable. They are not set by us. We can say what we charge and they can negotiate with you. Now, this amount right here, sorry, the amount in that box, whatever you put, oh, now it's green again. Whatever you put in that box, you cannot be paid more than that amount. So if you put 2% and the seller thinks he's gonna pay you 3%, you can only receive 2%. So make sure when you are sitting down with your buyer and do that, hey, put 3. It's still negotiable when you're writing the contract, right? It doesn't mean that you can't take 2.5 if that's what the seller's willing to pay you. But you cannot take any more money than that is in the amount of the compensation right there. Now, I really wish it would not be great. Payments received by broker from the sellers or others. So if you say I charge 3%, the other agent is willing, the seller is willing to compensate you 2.5%, but you still want 3%. Your buyer can pay that other 0.5%. So what would happen is the 2.5% would be deducted from the 3% and your buyer would be paying 5% if you choose. You can take 2.5 only. You do not have to take the full 3, but that would be the maximum you could take. That makes sense? Yes.
If you decide to take the 2.5, do you have to then make another agreement or modify?
There is a modification of a buyer broker agreement. So my suggestion, and I'll show you that form, my suggestion is just to make it specific for that property, because if for some reason it falls out of escrow, you don't want your modification to be for every
So the
property
modification would be specific
to the buyer broker, and you can modify it just for that specific
But your buyer
transaction.
broker can be Jeffers.
Correct. Yeah, all right? Okay. So, like I said, anything that the seller pays would be deducted from the amount of compensation here. If you choose to make your buyer pay the other portion, you can do so. Now, the E3, 4C, continued right to payment for broker-involved properties. Say your buyer broker agreement, yes.
Before we leave the last section, so if the seller agreed to pay 3%, but the buyer agreement only agreed to 2%, what happened to the 1%?
Nothing.
The seller didn't get to pay the
No,
buyer.
because when you take a listing agreement, you're not asking, I mean, obviously you're having that conversation with your seller about if they're willing to pay compensation, or actually we're calling it consideration, not considerations, we're calling it concessions, sorry.
Can you cushion it?
Gotta get used to that new word.
Can you cushion it like 2-3%?
No, it has to be a specific amount.
Number? Okay.
So
That's
then
why
what
aim
happened-
higher, you can take lower.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And that 1% difference, the seller didn't pay the
Correct.
buyer.
No,
They paid
you've
the 2%.
negotiated your commission as a listing agent with the seller. It's the buyer's agent's responsibility to negotiate their commission, not yours. That's the whole thing with this lawsuit, is because people were saying that that commission is already set in place and wasn't negotiable. So therefore, if you've had a conversation with your seller and say, you know, usually the buyer's broker will ask for anywhere between 2 to 3%, that will be negotiated with the purchase agreement. That makes sense? So if they say they're willing to pay 3 and the buyer broker agreement comes in saying 2, they pay 2, no matter what. Yeah.
During an offer, is the listing agent granted the right to see these forms?
During an offer, yes, you are supposed to submit page 5 of your buyer broker agreement with the offer. Also, that page 5 will be submitted to escrow once escrow is open for them to see how the commission is being paid. So I'll get to page 5 in a minute and I'll show you that. It's not
It wasn't even liquoring out.
weird, right? Here, let's see. I know this is probably gonna screw us all up, but see if it comes back up. There we go, okay. So that is your meat of it right here. Okay, continued right to payment for broker-involved properties. Just like the listing agreement, there is a period that you can write in an amount of days that if your buyer broker agreement has expired and that buyer wants to still purchase one of the homes that you showed them, you would put, say, 90 days in there. And if they agree to purchase that home within 90 days, even after your buyer broker agreement has expired, you are still gonna be compensated for that. But here's the trick. Before it expires, right before, there is a form that you have to fill out saying what properties you have showed them. Because you have to have proof that you have showed them properties. So that form is the, let me see if I can remember the name of it, it's the, sorry.
NBIP.
Yes, all these
Whatever that stands
damn
for,
acronyms, right?
NBIP.
Yes. Do I even have it? I'm surprised it doesn't really falls out on here. But yeah, there is a form that you are, notice of broker involved properties, the NBIP. Sorry, and it is in your packet here.
Okay.
And we'll get to that, cause we'll come through it, but that is what that refers
Is
to.
the buyer identification of preference and properties?
No. So this is the modification of terms for the buyer representation that we were talking about. If you need to modify your buyer. Notice of broker involved properties, that's the one we're talking about. So if your buyer broker agreement is set to expire, this is the form you would fill out, telling them what properties you were involved with during your buyer broker agreement. And if they decide to buy one of those properties, you would still be compensated. Yes.
Does that apply to those houses that you've taken them into? What if I've sent it and we haven't actually physically walked into the house? Is it?
It gets a little tricky because they can have access to anything you've sent them, you know what I mean? Really, you're sending them the whole MLS when you've given them, so it really has to be something that.
Like how Uncle Email said, you sent
Right,
over
no,
emails.
that would not count. It would be something that you have to physically have had involvement in and taken them and seen the property.
Where does the 90 days?
It goes in, let's go back to that. No, it goes in section, E3. The continuing period shall be blank calendar days after the representation period or any extension. So, a lot of the times I see agents checking that box on the listing agreement and not putting the amount of days in there, so we'll get to that later, but,
So,
yes.
Is there a form to extend this? Let's say you're at the end of your contract with a buyer, you wanna keep working with.
The modification of terms for the buyer broker
So that
agreement
would
will
extend it, you don't have
will
to-
extend it, so you don't have to do a whole new agreement, it's just kind of an extension for the buyer broker agreement.
And on E3, can you put in 365 days?
Put it what?
I mean.
You could, right?
You could, because it only pertains to the properties you've shown them,
Right.
so, I mean,
But that was before.
there is no standard for that. Okay. The next is buyer financial and personal information. There is a form for that, imagine that. So, if
Oh my
you,
God,
when you're
that's-
taking your buyer broker agreement, kinda wanna know, hey, what does this buyer, how does this buyer qualify? What do they have? Where's their money coming from? There is the buyer financial and personal information form. Not mandatory, but there is a form for that. That's what I'm gonna say the whole presentation. There is a form for that, right? So it basically is the buyer's financial information. So you have a little bit of information before you take them out to showing properties. Okay? And then the other financial information, this is kind of important, and I'm not really, it's strategy, okay? There's a box here, buyer does not have sufficient funds to pay the broker. You check that box, the buyer is not on the hook to pay you anything. If you can't negotiate the commission with the purchase agreement and the deal doesn't go together because of commission, the buyer is off the hook to not pay you because this box is checked that they don't have the money to pay it. But if you don't check the box, it's kind of, I don't know what the best scenario would be here, because you're gonna be submitting this information to the listing agent, right? So you're telling the listing agent, my buyer can't pay me, it's either you're a seller or nothing. Seller says, no, I'm not gonna pay you, then what? Right? But if your buyer can't pay you anyway, they can finance it, right, John?
No, not directly.
Not directly.
Well, you can increase the sale price of the property to get that credit back, just as you would with regards to closing costs. How many of you guys have written offers, where you presented them and you guys asked for closing costs because your client didn't have it? Like, generally speaking, it's first time buyers that have that
Yeah.
issue. So back in the day when that was more prominent, we would increase the sale price to get the money back.
Yeah,
Same difference here, so don't
into that a little bit more when we get to the purchase agreement, because there's two sections in the purchase agreement that ask for concessions. Okay, so we'll talk about that when we get to that. But, so it's gonna be up to you to kind of decide what route you wanna go. Do you wanna negotiate commission and whatever is negotiated is negotiated? Do you wanna say that your buyer doesn't have money to pay the commission and the offer will only go through if the seller is paying it? Your choice. And
So, just to play devil's advocate on that, what happens if we show property and they're not gonna pay us anything, and then that's the property that the client really wants?
Yeah.
Where does our obligation end?
you kind of walk away at that point,
But
unfortunately.
you're under a,
But you check the box that the buyer doesn't have the money to pay for it, and that's part of your contract. So therefore, if the buyer can't pay for it and is unwilling to pay for it, then the deal is kind of dead.
or you do.
Or you just negotiate until you get it to go together. Increase sales price, decrease, there's.
Do we have to check one of those boxes in that, or can we just leave them both?
No, you do not have to check either of those boxes.
Okay.
Those are financial considerations.
Let's say they say no, they can't pay, and you submit the offer and it gets refused.
Mhm.
So then that buyer goes away. Well, what if the buyer goes to the listing agent and goes, write it for me and give me, help me out here, but you've already shown it. Do you have procuring cause like we used to do?
Procuring cars is very, very hard to
But
fight.
once you've
Yeah,
written an
well,
offer.
they can
That's
reserve the
why you.
But it's non-exclusive,
That's
even
why
though
you-
there is and that's, if the deal goes south, I probably would do the broker involved properties form, just so you have proof that you have shown them that property and they sign it. But from everything I have seen and what the attorneys have talked about, they pretty much say it's a dead deal at that point. If you, it's like negotiating anything in a contract. If terms can't be agreed upon, then it's a dead deal, unless you come back and negotiate it a different way.
Hutchinson said a couple days ago in the seminar, he gave a procuring causes, it's still.
Yeah, that's why I said it's very hard to do procuring cause, especially with all
Yeah,
these new
so
changes.
On that topic, he spoke about that, and the reason why he was saying it was dead is because you now have a contract with a client where you would win the case because you've already got the client that you've shown the property to where they've signed an agreement, so you would have a procuring cost. What he was saying as far as it's gone, it doesn't mean it's eliminated, where you're not gonna go through a process of a recurring cost case. It just means that now there's no question. You sold
Yeah.
the property, you were the
But-
part of the sale of the property.
It is non-exclusive. So if you have it exclusive, you're gonna get paid no matter what, but it's gonna be the buyer that pays it.
Yeah. And just so you know, guys, it's always been the buyer paying for it.
Yeah, I
Okay?
mean, they're offering the
So it's also
purchase.
your presentation and how you're presenting the case to the
Exactly.
client. You're gonna have to do more of your job as far as, just like you do on a listing, right? Very seldom are you just walking in and getting a contract signed without explaining what it is you're gonna do for what you're gonna get paid for, right? So the same thing applies now on the buyer side. You're gonna do the same thing, so all about your presentation, what is it you're gonna do for them? So you're gonna have to hone your skills a lot better than what you did before, okay?
Right, yes, Richard.
Take that a little further, what if, this happens where you submit the offer and they say, no, they're not gonna pay commission, all of a sudden the buyer goes back and talks to the listing agent, and the listing agent goes to the seller and says, hey, they really want this, that, and the other, and the seller goes, well, if you're taking care of it, I'll pay you for it. Now what happens?
There's the listing agent, your listing agreement is only good for your listing commission. It is not good for any buyer's commission. So
not
you
the
in turn
agency
would have to
anymore?
write an offer and you would have to do your form. And then in that case, if they're gonna pay a commission to the listing agent, they would have paid a commission to the buyer's agent. So they're,
Sometimes, but yeah, that's what I'm asking.
But you can't-
You may have that,
say you'll pay one agent and not another.
you're gonna, I would disagree because
Because
I
at
think
that
it's gonna
point,
happen.
it falls under broker involved properties and there is procuring costs. So if your seller says, well, I'll pay him, but I'm not gonna pay you, then you have the ability to go to arbitration.
And the listing agent has to have it signed anyway by the buyer.
The buyer broker agreement does not have a seller signature on it, no.
No, when he's saying they will go to the listing agent, well, the listing agent has.
The listing agent would have to have a buyer broker agreement also.
Right, no, I'm not disagreeing with that, I'm just saying, what happens if all of a sudden now they go to the listing agent where there's really no commission to be paid to start with? He goes back to the seller and says, look, they really want this property, and they're basically now coming to me directly to do it. I can't do anything like that.
You, as a listing agent, can't take that because it's a.
That's why I'm asking that.
Yeah, you can't because of the broker involved properties with the buyer broker representation. It's not exclusive, yes, but if it is a broker involved property for you, then it is tied to you.
Okay, that's what I was asking.
So the buyer doesn't have the option of just going and buying that property through somebody else because it's a broker involved property. They either pay you or don't get the property. That makes sense. Now also, just to go back here at the top, in this section, the 3-month period, if you exceed that 3-month period, it's a null and void contract. It voids the contract if you go over the time frame of 3 months. So you cannot put in any longer than 3 months, okay? Any other questions on that? Yes?
One part I thought I understood, you said you have to include this whole thing with your offer, or
Page
just
5. Page
Okay.
5 is the only thing you would be submitting with your offer.
So the listing agent might not see G2 where buyer does not have funds, buyer does not.
Correct. Now, we did have a fun scenario come up this week where an agent went to show a property and the listing agent said, please send me your buyer broker agreement before I will allow you to see the property.
Are they allowed to do that?
Don't know. Haven't read. I don't think they can require it, but if you don't, you're not gonna get in to see the property.
Now, do we just send page 5 then?
You can just send page 5. Showing that you have a buyer broker and what the compensation. So there's some listing agents that are kind of asking you to show your cards before you've even written an offer.
You're supposed to cooperate with other brokers, that's part of the,
Correct.
you know,
But,
you-
but compensation is now negotiated a part of the purchase agreement. It's not negotiated as a part of showing their listing.
Exactly.
So,
So we can go and say,
you can say no, but then will they let you into the property? I don't know.
Well, if they say no, they're not cooperating, like.
Yeah, yeah, yes.
Back to E1, let's say we put 3% in there. At what point, I don't know where it says like, yes, you owe me 3% no matter what, or we'll renegotiate once we write them. Or
Well,
is it assumed we renegotiate?
3% is the maximum,
Right.
and it does say on here,
3% is the maximum?
no, I mean, if you write 3% in, 3%
Oh, yeah,
is gonna be
okay.
your maximum. But it's not, it says right here, the amount or rate of real estate commissions is not fixed by law. They are set by each broker individually and negotiated between buyer and buyer broker. Now, what you put in here is what you're saying I charge for my services. I mean, you, okay. Sorry, I
Sure,
think this
that's
went to sleep. I mean,
So
it's
at
part
that
of a
point, is
contract,
that
you're
what
gonna
you say?
negotiate no matter what.
At that point, you say, if they offer me 2, you're still gonna owe me 1.
You can, yes. Yep,
Or
that is
is
a
it-
conversation you will have.
We're putting 3% in here, but whatever they offer me.
That's
I
up to
won't
you.
be less than 2.
That's up to you as an agent.
But can you write that in there?
No.
We're putting 3% in here, but I'll lower it to as low as 2 if that's all they're offering me.
No, it has to be one percentage amount. You cannot put a range, because you're gonna, I mean, when you submit your offer, there's a form that you're gonna fill out asking for commission and how much you're gonna ask for. It's part of the offer and it's negotiated at that point. Until you write that offer and get a counter or whatever from the other agent, you don't know what they're gonna offer back. You can have that conversation with them and say, hey, I'm asking 3. If they're paying 2.5, at that time, we'll negotiate whether I take the 2.5% or you owe me 2.5%, they owe me 2.5% and you pay the 0.5%.
Oh, you renegotiate again.
Everything is
Your own
negotiated
commission
with the purchase
at the time
agreement.
of an offer.
Yeah. So this is saying the maximum that you will ask to be paid.
modification agreement that you can, extend the expiration date
Yes,
another 3 months?
which, yes, it, only a 3-month period at a time. So you can extend it, but you can't make the original agreement longer than 3 months.
Terry?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Along the lines on the show me your buyer broker agreement before I show you, do we think we're probably gonna see, this is what's just running through my head, listing agents are gonna list it for 3%, because there's gonna be incentive, where they're like, well, you know what, I don't even have to deal with the buyer broker, I could just run the whole side for 3%, you know what I mean? And I mean, because they got their 3% in place with the listing, they might not care and go,
It's possible, anything's possible, just like the price that you're offering, you know what I mean? If you've got a seller that's not willing to pay commission, and you have this conversation with your buyer, if you want this property, you're gonna have to compensate me, that's gonna change how they write an offer. Okay, well, am I gonna write a full price offer, because now I have to pay my agent? So, I think it's really important as a listing agent for you to fully explain those things to your seller when you take the listing. That, yeah, you can say you're not gonna pay a commission, but, okay, 1, are you gonna get a full price offer? 2, who's gonna pay it?
right, because if you don't have a strong buyer, if you don't have a strong buyer's agent,
Correct,
you're just gonna get mowed over.
yeah, for sure. Yes, Robert?
Yeah, I got a question. I'm looking in here and it has the modification of terms buyer representation agreement. And it states right in here, compensation, the amount of compensation to be charged is as follows. So they're offering, they want 3, they want 2, and you put 2 in here and have it signed, have we just modified the amount?
For, what I suggested earlier, I said, if you get somebody who, you put 3, and then you're negotiating a deal and it's negotiated to 2, I would do a modification of terms, changing it to 2%.
Right.
For that specific property.
Right, well, this is what I'm talking about.
For this, yes,
Okay.
yeah, for that specific property, yes.
Oh, so on the listing agreement, she was talking about if the seller represents, or if a buyer goes directly to the seller, it has that the seller.
We'll get to that.
can-
I'm not there yet. We'll get to
Okay.
that. We're gonna discuss that yet, when we get to the listing agreement. So, if you see on this form, just the same as the others, this, section right here where it says paragraph number, there are explanations for all of those items following page 1. So, A2 is paragraph 4B. Is that a B? Yeah, 4B. So if you go to 4B behind that front page, it gives an explanation of what that is. Okay, so everything on this front grid here is explained in paragraphs following the grid in the following pages.
Yeah.
So, this page right here, because if you see right here, this paragraph 16 is buyer confirms that the compensation specified in 2E for broker services is. This is the page that you would send to the listing agent for confirmation of your buyer broker agreement, and also to escrow once escrow is opened, for them to know how the commission is being paid. Okay?
So, sorry, I'm confused. So if you're representing your seller and you've got a 2.5% commission going to the buyer.
You will not have that, because there is no buyer's compensation in the listing
Right, but
agreement.
you've had this
anymore.
conversation.
If you've had a
You
conversation
know that
with
your
them.
seller is willing to pay up to 2.5%.
Correct.
Buyer's agent calls you, what is the question? Are you paying, is the
Okay.
seller paying?
We're getting ahead, I'll get to that when I get to the listing agreement. Okay? We'll go through the listing. Okay? So, we've gone over that. Now, this is a huge form. This is gonna help you a lot. This is the broker compensation advisory. Basically, what it does is explains all of the ways that the listing commission is paid and the buyer's agent's commission is paid. And it explains the different ways. So as you can see, right here at the top, listing agreement compensation is fully negotiable. This is the key words that the NAR lawsuit has brought about. The commissions are always negotiable, so that is why it is included. So optional additional compensation if buyer is unrepresented. We'll get to that when we get to the listing agreement. This whole top section here is really for when you're taking, down here, broker agreements with buyers. This is talking about how commissions are fully negotiable. It talks about how you're required to have a buyer broker agreement, and if you don't have a buyer broker agreement, you are not allowed to be compensated at all. So you have to have that buyer broker agreement, whether it's exclusive or non-exclusive. So if you're working with a buyer right now and don't have one, before August 13th, you need to get a buyer broker agreement, okay?
So Carrie, so you couldn't double in like I just talked about?
You
You
can't.
can't do the workload of the buyer without a buyer broker, even if it's gratis?
Correct. So right here, it talks about the buyer pays the compensation pursuant to the buyer broker agreement, or it talks the option of the seller paying the compensation. So the buyer negotiates for seller to compensate the buyer broker, or buyer's agent negotiates an agreement directly with the seller. Okay, so those are your options here, and it fully explains it. And down here at the bottom, it explains the change that took place because of the NAR settlement.
I currently have one in escrow, it's not closing to the end of the month. Do I need to fill this out?
No, only things that are not in escrow before August 13th. This has been included with any forms changes as of 6/24. So they did a 6/24 forms change and they did a 7/24 forms change. This was already included. It was slightly different in the 6/24, but there was this information already in there. So if it's something that was done after the 6/24, it might have already been a part of it. And listing agreements after 6/24 were also included this. Okay. So there's your buyer broker. Okay, next, we're gonna go to the buyer's material issues for a specific property. Now, why this has become so important, I don't know, because we've already always had a buyer material issues form, but basically they're saying that if your buyer has material issues relating to a specific property, they should be filled out in this. Now, a material issue is anything that may or may not change their mind about buying the property, basically. That information, it's not a mandatory form, and it's a disclosure.
Give me an example.
Go ahead.
Like, I have a commercial dumpster that is right up against the, property, and the smell is atrocious. And as a listing agent, I've told all the buyer's agents that we are in negotiation with the city, and that it will be removed at some point, but we can't give a specific date.
Yeah, so that would be a buyer material issue. If the buyer doesn't agree with that being there, they will put this in there. So yes, for sure. Okay. Next one is cancellation of buyer broker representation. If, for some reason, your buyer, I don't wanna work with you anymore. We've never had that happen. Never happened. Never happened. You have to cancel your buyer broker agreement. If it's an exclusive buyer broker agreement, it is a 30-day notice of cancellation. So your buyer says, I don't wanna work with you, fine, you do a cancellation. After 30 days of the cancellation, if it's exclusive, then they are free to go whatever. If it is non-exclusive and your buyer wants to cancel, it's effective immediately. There's no 30-day waiting period, okay? So that's what this form basically states. Cancellation of representation.
Oh, but if you gave them one of those buyer-involved broker properties, they can't just cancel with you and then go to use
Correct.
another agent.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
What
So
if
you
have
would,
it- So what if you have an original, like, you know, 90 days, or 120 days afterwards, and you cancel it, 30 days, you cancel it, is that still?
so before you cancel it, you have to give them the buyer notice of broker-involved properties.
Right.
And then for 90 days after, or whatever
Still
time
works.
amount, that is still in fact if they
Okay.
decide to go back
Okay, yeah.
and buy one of those properties. Okay. Modification of terms. Now, we talked about this form a little bit. This is where you extend it. You can extend a buyer broker agreement for 3-month periods only. So if your first agreement is expiring after 3 months, you extend it for another 3 months, you're good to go. This is where we talked about compensation being modified. And then there's another section that you can modify anything that you say they decided they no longer want Orange County, they now want to go to Riverside. You can amend that here, okay? Also, like I said, you can amend it for a specific property. If you present an offer and they're only gonna offer you 2%, your buyer broker is 3%, you can change the compensation for a specific property. Okay? This is the new modification of terms of listing agreement. Before, we just had one modification of terms, and you chose what document you were modifying, right? So for modifying the listing agreement, it's a different form than modifying the buyer broker agreement. Now they're separate and you have a form for each. Okay, so basically this changes your expiration date, purchase price, list price, sorry, any other information that's in the listing agreement can be modified on the modification of listing. Okay. Multiple listing services addendum. Now, in the past, this form and information that is on this form was included in the listing agreement. Now they've removed it from the listing agreement and it is a whole separate form. Okay? So basically, you remember on page 2, it had that box that talked about the importance of putting it in the MLS and all that kind of good stuff. That was in the listing agreement before, but now it's separated out and it's put here. How the listing agreement is still 7 pages, I don't know, but. And this one is 2 pages, so really it would have been 9 pages if they kept it all together. I think it's just to make us feel better.
Carrie, is it an automatic attachment to the listing?
Correct, it is an automatic attachment to the listing agreement, right? So one of the important things on this form, if we go to page 2, right here, this, right here, seller concessions. Now this is where it talks about if the seller is willing to accept offers of concessions. So you need to check this box, B2, if you're having that conversation with your seller and your seller has agreed that they're going to pay concessions of any kind, whether it be for the buyer's closing costs, whether it be compensation for the buyer's agent, it's considered concession and that box should be checked that they are willing to accept offers of concessions. Now, we haven't fully seen yet how the MLS is going to handle it because it'll come out on the 13th of this month. But if you notice right here, they have already made an adjustment in the MLS. Now there's nothing in that field right now and there's no options to put anything in that field right now. But basically there's an area that the seller will consider concessions in an offer. And I'm pretty sure that right there is gonna be a yes or no. The question is, will our MLS allow to put dollar amounts anywhere? And according to, the attorneys, we don't know how each individual MLS is going to be different.
Isn't it go against everything, because we're saying it's negotiable, so we
But it's
you put a max.
You put a max, yeah. So it's still considered a concession. You're not
Correct.
saying you don't know if it's compensation, you don't know if it's
Percentage or monetary dollar.
or if it's for buyer's closing costs, it's just concessions in general.
Got it. Carrie, I thought I saw an email that did have 4 different distinct things on there from.
I'm actually, CRMLS is doing a webinar this afternoon that I'm gonna watch, and I'm figuring at that point, I'm gonna get to learn exactly what they're gonna allow and what they're not. So
Yeah,
once I watch that this afternoon, I will make sure everybody is updated on what it's going to be.
There's one going on right now, and there's.
Yeah, I know there's one, but I'm taking the one this afternoon. Because I'm here, so.
So Carrie, you're saying you'll find out if it'll say yes or no, and if it's a yes.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that is gonna be a yes or no. The question is are you gonna be able to put in agent remarks?
Right, the agent remark is max 2.5%.
Or, I don't. Stay tuned, don't know.
Yeah, I read something where they stated, that they're no looking for any violations of people putting in dollar amounts.
Dollar amounts, yeah.
In the MLS, so.
So after I watch, I have a feeling it's gonna be no, you can't. You're just gonna be able to say you'll allow offers for concessions.
Yes or no.
Yes or no,
I
yes.
don't think it's any different from us right now. The MLS does have that concession, and you are allowed to do it when the deal closes, or you put it in escrow, when you change the status from active to either.
It does talk about concessions
Yeah,
there.
and then it allows you to put it in.
I don't know if that's gonna be, the dollar amounts or anything, or, I don't know, who knows?
Correct, it might just be verbiage.
It might just be verbiage, I don't know. Now there is, because, my buyer paid $5,000 in closing costs.
They do have it in 4 sections right now.
Yeah.
I did see that, yeah. So it divides it in 4 sections.
It has in there, and I have a feeling that's what we're gonna be stuck with, the yes or no. So just so you know. If the seller puts no there, you know before you go in to write an offer. Guess what? The seller is not gonna offer to pay my commission. It is still negotiable. You still can ask them to, based on your offer, but you know going in, they're not willing. And I've had agents come to me. I've seen 2 properties this week where in the compensation, it says $100, see notes. And then in the notes, they talk about either they're gonna, accept concessions or not, or I had one said basically they're just looking for investors and they're not gonna pay any commission. So pay attention.
Already on the MLS?
Already on the MLS. And I don't know how much of that would be a violation at this point. I'm not sure.
Yeah, what is the violation?
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm gonna go back. There's our multiple listing services. So right here, this is the area you want to pay attention to, type B. Now, in this multiple listing, it does have a section here that seller instructs broker to begin marketing the property to the public on a date. That's always been in the previous listing agreement. So if you take a listing and the seller's not ready, you wanna wait for pictures, whatever, you can put that date in there. But that does not relieve you of the responsibility to still do the seller's exclusion from the multiple listing service.
Oh, so that's what my question, so you were.
You still have to do both. Our MLS requires, due to the clear cooperation policy, that you do an SELM regardless of whether you have it filled out in that section or not. Because if you go to the next page, it asks, clear cooperation, yes.
So on that particular date, would that start like the coming soon period?
Coming soon is totally different. Coming soon is not marketing. There's no marketing with a coming soon. So there still will be the coming soon form.
Okay.
So this is when you begin marketing to the public. So yes, it would coincide with your coming soon, but that's the day you're gonna go on the market where it's gonna be in the MLS and everybody can come see it.
So that's like old school office exclusive.
Yes and no, because technically if you're putting that there, coming soon, you can't show it to anybody.
Right.
But if you do a registered listing, anybody within your office, your brokerage can go see that registered listing. Coming soon, nothing. That's the difference, okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, you can fill out that box and check it, but you're still gonna need the SELM. This page right here, clear cooperation policy does not apply. Do not check that, because our MLS does comply with the clear cooperation policy.
Which section? Where's that?
It is on page 2 of the multiple listing service addendum, and it is 3F, yeah. Don't check that box. Now, if you see above, this one right here, at the very top, it says, seller instructs broker not to market the property ever. So if you're not putting it in the MLS at all, you will need to check that box, but you also still need the SELM. So anything that changes when you're putting it in the MLS, because when we take a listing, you're saying you're gonna put it in the MLS and offer it to people within a 24-hour period of taking that listing. Now, I'm gonna be really honest with you, this is a $2,500 fine if you violate it. Nobody wants to pay $2,500, so just get your paperwork and ducks in a row. And no matter how much an agent calls and begs you and says, let my client see your property, if you do that, you've gotta put it in the MLS within 24 hours and let other people see it also. Okay, that makes sense? Any questions? Okay, moving on. Okay, there's your form notice of broker involved properties that we talked about. Now, here's the new one, open house visitor non-agency. For all of you that are open house agents that hold open houses, things have changed a little bit because now, if you create any type of an agency relationship with anyone, you are required to do a buyer-broker agreement. But that doesn't mean that everybody that comes into your open house has to sign a buyer-broker agreement. Basically, this form here is like a sign-in sheet. So if you have it with you, this form explains to them that you're not representing them. You're here on behalf of the seller. They can walk around and see the property. The minute you start acting in some type of agency capacity, somebody say, you can show them around and talk about the properties, any information that's on the flyer, anything about the property, but the minute you talk about financing or other properties or anything like that, you're now creating an agency relationship with them and should have a buyer-broker agreement, right? So you can still do open houses, you can still collect information, but the minute you create an agency-type relationship, you better have a buyer-broker agreement in place. Right?
So even discussing a property that sold a month ago down the street.
That's an
is-
agency
that's-
relationship, yeah.
So,
Because you're there, really, supposed to be there, working on the behalf of your seller, who you
Sure.
have an agency relationship with,
Yeah.
right?
this is mandatory at open house?
It's not mandatory, but you better know the rules, because if you start to create that agency relationship, you're gonna need a buyer-broker agreement. Now, they did something a little kind of funky, but there is a mini buyer-broker agreement. It's a mini one, it's a mini one. It's called Property Showing and Representation Agreement. Now, this can be good for up to just 3 properties. So if you are at an open house and you start to get an agency relationship going, you can do this form very quickly and say let me talk to you about this property, have this filled out. It's only good for a 30-day period, but it would work the same as a buyer-broker agreement when you're writing offers on any of the 3 properties that are up there. So, 30 days, 3 specific properties max. Amount of compensation you expect to be paid, it's kind of the same thing, it's just a smaller version of it. Okay, any questions on that? It's supposed to be easier to do with a client that you're not spending much time with.
So all these different formats, like we have somebody coming in as a buyer, you're talking, you're asking them if they sign anything, this is gonna confuse the shit out of them. They're not gonna know, oh, I signed the mini or I signed
That's the whole
plus.
thing, yeah, exactly, you don't, it's gonna take a little bit more. As a buyer's agent, it's not gonna be as easy as it used to be, which may be good. Get rid of some of the riffraff, right? And like I said, this is only 3 pages instead of 7. Now you're at the residential listing agreement. Okay. Kind of looks similar to the purchase agreement now, where they have a grid on the first page. So, listing agreement. A1 is the amount of time your listing agreement is for. It's always been the rule, but never been really spelled out. A listing agreement for a residential property of any kind cannot be longer than a 24-month period. I know.
Longer than what?
24 months, 2 years. I mean, who takes a 2-year grind? I don't know. You never know. You have one? Yeah. So it's always been the law that it can't be more than 24 months, but it's never been specifically spelled out in the agreement. Now it is. Then obviously we have the list price right here. Now, this is where we get to compensation. This is compensation for you, the listing agent only. Does not include any compensation for the buyer's broker, okay? It can be a percent, it can be a dollar amount. If you have a specific schedule, if it sells for this price, it's this, you know, you can do that, but there's a box you can check and you can add an addendum for a specific compensation schedule if you'd like. Not that any of us ever do that, but it is possible. Now, C2 is where people get confused. Basically, C2 says additional compensation to seller's broker if buyer is unrepresented. This does not mean if I double end it, I am charging this. What this means, if a buyer comes to you, the listing agent, and says, I want to buy this property, I don't have an agent and I don't want an agent, okay? So basically they are an unrepresented buyer, okay? Not represented by an agent. We all know you as listing agents are gonna do more work if that buyer is unrepresented. Who's gonna meet them for inspections? Who's gonna meet the appraiser? It's gonna fall on you as the listing agent. So this here is additional compensation that would go to you as the listing agent if it is a non-represented buyer. And if that's the case, there's also a form for that.
So is that then the total, so like if it's
No,
just the
it would
seller
be
side?
an additional.
it's
So if it were
in
2%,
addition.
where's your regular commission, and you're gonna charge them 2 more, that's how it would be right now.
Carrie?
So it's an additional amount.
Question for you, so you have conversation with seller, they said, sure, I'll pay 3% to the buyer's agent. And
That's not that.
I know, but then, that's a conversation, and then later on, they change their mind, there's nothing in here anywhere.
No, because it's all negotiable. It's a conversation. You cannot put it in conversation. It's conversation. Everything is negotiable. So, like I said, if there is an unrepresented buyer, the form would be, it's buyer, non-agency is what it is. So basically, you're gonna have them sign the buyer non-agency form saying, you understand if you're purchasing this property, nobody's representing you.
So you're not signing any paperwork with the buyer?
Nope.
But you would like.
You
to
can't
sign
even,
that.
you can't fill out a purchase agreement for them, you cannot do any of that. That is on them to submit an offer.
So they have to sign that.
But they have to sign a buyer non-agency and submit their purchase agreement of some kind. I don't know.
more of a mess.
The attorney I saw last said, you can give them a blank contract, but you can't fill anything in.
Because of how strong.
Honestly, how many times is that gonna happen?
I mean, and this is very rare, but I guess CAR is now recognizing that you all should be compensated more if this comes up,
So if you
basically.
don't want to choose to do that, are you under on any obligation to your seller?
You have to present all
You have
offers.
to present everything.
So if a buyer comes to you unrepresented and says, here's my offer, you have to present that, no matter what. Your seller doesn't have to accept it. You can choose to go through the offer with them and say, here's the pros and cons of this offer, but you have to present it.
The wild, wild west, guys.
Right?
I feel like the seller would be opening himself
You
up
could
to
sign
like,
something in the contract that says any unrepresented buyer who denies the offer, you could have that in the contract.
Yeah, I mean, but if they hand you an offer, you have to present it, no matter what. Because if an offer comes in from an unrepresented person and it's $200,000, not saying this is gonna happen above what the seller is asking, do you think your seller's gonna wanna see that?
Yep.
And if you say, no, I don't have to show you that, then you're gonna be the one in trouble. Right? Yes?
Yeah, but they don't have the ability to present the offer unless they have access to the forms. And if you're not required to facilitate giving them the forms, how are they presenting an offer?
Their uncle.
Okay, that's fine, but they have to get the forms to present the offer.
Correct.
And if they complete the offer properly, you
Yeah.
have to present it.
Yep,
Well,
no
they
matter
don't
what.
have to use the car form, though. They have to order
Don't you have to use the car forms?
No.
You can make an offer on anything. Our E&O insurance company won't like it if you are using non-car forms, I can tell you that much. They're not gonna be as willing to, represent you if you are not using the proper forms, but yeah. Okay, so that is really what that is. Okay, yes?
Just real quick, if someone comes in and they say they're not represented, I just wanna spell it out. We cannot write the offer for them.
Nope,
We cannot, tell them about home inspectors or anything
nothing.
else.
You're not representing them. The only thing you can do is represent your seller.
So you can't represent both sides?
You can,
Oh, okay.
but the minute somebody comes to you, said, you gotta do a buyer broker agreement
Yeah. Okay.
and write the offer
Yeah.
and do the SBPP,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. So this is just if someone comes to you and says, I don't want an agent,
Got
that's
it.
pretty much what it is.
Okay, so we can just
I know.
put together a very thorough counteroffer
You would have to, correct.
and have just a signature.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why they're saying you can get more compensation, because it's gonna be more work for you as a listing agent to tie this thing together and make it work. Right? Okay, so the next, section is continuation of right to compensation for broker identified prospective buyers. That is the same thing that's on the buyer broker agreement. That is the amount of days that after your offer has expired, that if one of those buyers that came and saw the property comes back and decides they wanna buy it, even though your listing agreement is expired, If you check that box, put 90, 45, whatever days you wanna put in there, will cover you as the listing agent. But there is another trick to it. You do also have to give them, before the listing agreement expires, a list of people who have seen the property. Right? So it has to be both. It can't just be one or the other. It has to be both. And if you don't put a number of days in there, that voids it also. So you have to have a number of days, and you have to have a list of properties before it expires, not after. Can't wait a week.
You mean a list
So if you
of-
got your listing agreement, you see it's expiring, put that list together and give it to your buyer before it your seller before it expires.
Can that list be like the brokerages, like?
It has to be specific buyer.
Oh, wait, wait,
We won't even have the buyers info if they have an agent walking through with them, right?
right, we only have the agents.
But if you show it.
Well, you're gonna have to ask the buyer.
Yeah.
What if they lie about? That's the agent for the buyer's.
I mean, this is not gonna come up very often, let's be honest. But you do have to have a list. Yeah, and if you go to paragraph 4D in the contract, right here,
Well, you should have.
it talks about
Oh, yeah, well,
the percentage and what you need to put in your
oh,
list.
yeah. You can have the buyer's names in the page 5 of the buyer broker agreement when they submit, but they
But that's if they submit an offer. If they don't submit an offer, you don't know.
Maybe that's why the agent's asking for your buyer broker agreement before you
That's
show the
quite
property.
possible. But this has always been in the listing agreement, guys. It's not something new. It's always been there and the same rule. I'm just pointing it out to
No,
you
but we're all
because
gonna get
this is
better
one
now.
of the things that I see the most when I'm looking at files that nobody ever fills in.
Alright. What is it?
Yes, exactly, right? Okay, so back to page 1. Seller obligations to pay previous broker. This is gonna be if your listing that you have,
Previous.
yeah, was previously listed with somebody else. Okay? And if they have agreed to pay, say Leo has a listing and it's not quite working out. And his seller is gonna go now to a different brokerage. But Leo feels like he should still be compensated for the work he's done while he had the listing. You can negotiate that amount to be put in here to still be paid to Leo once it sells. That's what this really is.
So that means that other new agent taking the listing has to take the time.
Correct. Okay.
Would that also apply, like if Leo had his list of properties that he showed that person, and then they go back later with a different agent?
That's why you need buyer's names, not just brokerage
Right, but
names,
would you
yeah.
put that here as well, or?
No, that would be under the additional compensation section, not necessarily that seller option. This is to specifically pay a previous listing agent. Right, things that have always been there, items included, items excluded, leased items, solar, alarm, whatever, liened items, things that still need paying for, not leases can be ended. Liened items are part of the contract no matter what. If this home has smart features that the seller wants to include or exclude, right there. Next is MLS and public marketing. Property will be marketed by the following MLS. Primary. You know how many times I see people put OCAR or PWR? That's not your MLS, that's your association. Your MLS is CRMLS. That's what it is, okay? So that's what goes there. And there is the box below E2 that says, seller instructs broker not to take or use photographs in marketing except as required by the MLS. Well, guess what? Our MLS requires one, the front of the property. So that is required. So no matter what, even if your seller doesn't want other photos in there, it's required. We get a lot of phone calls after the fact saying, my buyer wants the pictures taken out of the MLS. Can't be done. Cannot be done. They are property of the MLS, and they are there, and the MLS will not remove them. So, if you wanna remove the pictures before it closes escrow, you can do that. And the buyer's agent should request that before escrow closes. So 2 days before, if they call you and say, hey, can you take the pictures out? You can do that. But after it closes, MLS will not remove them. You do have to keep one picture, yes, the outside. Okay, so that's what that means. Okay. Timing of presentation of offers. This is important because you put your offer active on Friday. You're gonna hold open house that weekend. You're gonna wait for all those offers to come in, and you've decided with the seller that you're gonna present your offers on Tuesday. Technically, you have to present the offers as they come in, unless you check the box and put when you're first presenting the offers. Okay. All right, buyer's supplemental offer letters. Okay, these are like the love letters from the buyer. Hi, I'm Cindy and Joe. We have 3 beautiful children, a dog, and we want to live in your beautiful home. It is defaulted for the buyer not, for the agent not to give those buyer's letters to the seller. So you need to have a discussion with your seller. Do you want to receive those letters or not? Here's where it falls into why they did the default to non-fair housing.
Yeah.
Discrimination. If your buyer sees these love letters from, and your seller sees these love letters from the buyer, is that gonna sway them one way or another?
Right.
Oh, I picked them because they're a beautiful family. Fair housing.
Yeah, because they're blonde.
Yeah, so it's up to you how, if your seller, well, it's up to the seller really if they wanna see those letters or not, but it's a good conversation to have with them about. We can give you these letters, but you can't choose an offer based on the information in the letters, okay? All right, so next is investigative reports. Now this has changed a little bit. As you see, it defaults to the natural hazard disclosure being ordered within 5 days of taking your listing, okay? Now, there are advantages to this. One, you will know more about the property, and I'm gonna let Roberta over here talk about that a little bit, because she's our NHD gal.
Thank you for inserting me in the middle. I know it's a little confusing, but we thought it would be appropriate to have the NHD, the preferred one for you guys at Tiffany and Terrasola at My NHD, avatar superheroes that we are. But yes, this new listing contract as of July 24th now requires that when you take a listing, the default is within 5 days after they're taking the listing to order the NHD report. Now, a lot of people say, well, I normally order the NHD, I'll let escrow do it when you open. But a lot of you realize the best practice has always been to order the NHD, the Natural Hazard Disclosure Report, as soon as you took a listing. And now that's the default of 5 days. But a lot of people say, yeah, but I don't wanna pay for it. What's gonna happen if, like, say it gets counted out? You owe us no money at all unless it closes. So there's no risk involved in ordering it within 5 days of taking the listing. I know you guys rely heavily upon your TCs. We have fabulous Judy here in the back. She does a great job for you guys at Tiffany. I know you work with Christine and several others that you guys choose, which is great. But please either order it with them right away. You can order it with me. You can contact me. I've given you guys little avatars of myself here. You can order yourself, but we just want you to have the resource since this is a big change, and a lot of you just kind of let it go until that time when you opened escrow, right?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, like it is defaulted for that box to be checked, and the default is 5 days. You can make it longer if you like. You can uncheck that box, but CAR is under the impression and the view that the more information you know up front when you take your listing, the more you can disclose later, and the better that is, okay? Same with the other reports. So if you're gonna order your pest control, check the box. A lot of people wanna know where they stand in regards to a termite report before it sells, because if they get a request for repairs, then the seller already knows, guess what? That termite's gonna probably be included on the request for repairs, and they already know the dollar amount and what they're negotiating with ahead of time. So if you're ordering anything up front, that's where it would be.
And another reason you wanna have it up front anyway is like here in Huntington Beach, we have a lot of abandoned oil wells under the dirt. We've talked about that before. You wanna know right away if that parcel falls over that. And in areas in Cypress, you have properties that are possibly within 1 to 2 miles of possibly commercial strip center, whatever. Well, there's gas stations and there's dry cleaners that have underground leaking storage tanks. And that is in our report, so that your buyer can't come back and say, you never disclosed this information. I have contaminated table water and I have cancer and I'm gonna blame you for lack of disclosure. It's crazy what we see in the litigious world. We're here to make sure you're safe with that and we identify all parties in the transaction.
Here's another scenario. I'm gonna point to Lily on this one because this has just happened with her. Lily took a listing. Listing went into escrow. Buyer's in escrow. Buyer goes to order their homeowners association homeowners insurance. Buyer comes back, says, there's been claims on this property. Seller's going, no, there hasn't. I've owned this house for so long, never been a claim. There is a renter in the property. Guess what? Renter made claims on their rental insurance, which is tied to the property. So therefore, yes, it is.
Renter's insurance was just for personal items.
It is tied to the property. So any renter's insurance claims will also show up on the property.
Car insurance too.
Car insurance also. So say there's a car parked in the driveway and your laptop gets stolen out of it. That is considered a homeowner's renter's insurance claim. But anything like that will be attached.
How does the owner not become part of that conversation?
It's not their policy, therefore they are not notified and they are not allowed to be told what is in that policy.
But yet it affects their house's insurability, so that's not right.
But that's how
Insurance is
it's
getting
7
away.
years, and that's how it is. So, as the things that you may order up front, maybe a clue report, if there's a renter in there, you might wanna know, right? You never know. So that's just a scenario. With Lily's situation, what ended up happening is the buyer did get insurance, but it was more expensive through a different and the seller agreed to pay for a 1-year policy, correct? Because that claim will actually drop off in December of this year.
Yeah, it's like $14.95.
Yeah. Yeah.
What did you do about the title report?
No, when they went to go order their insurance. So their insurance, whoever's gonna insure the property runs a report to see if there's been any claims, and it shows up after.
Is there any way that we could find that out prior to going into
You like what we were talking about, the things that you order, you can order a clue report, but it does take 30 days to get the clue report.
Right.
Yeah, so you wanna make sure.
By mail.
By mail, yeah, they don't email it, it is snail mail and it takes 30 days. So, just something to think about.
And we're still not sure if it's even gonna pop up in there because the insurance companies have a different database that might not be the clue
Clue report,
database.
yeah, so it's just something to be aware of, okay? All right.
So I guess big money.
Yeah, no doubt. The other boxes on here are things that have always been there. Seller intends to include a contingency of purchase for replacement property. Seller opts out of having lockbox or sign. Additional terms. Advisories you can see here, the broker compensation advisory, which we already talked about, is default checked, so it will automatically be populated when you do a listing search. If there are any other forms, such as trust advisory, short sale, REO, that kind of thing, you'll need to check a box and make sure those forms are included, okay? Any questions on the listing agreement?
What did you say?
Do you have any questions?
Yes. This happened in the past, a long past. An agent have a listing with a family member, and the listing went for 6 months. The listing expired, and then the buyer who walked into that home that she showed also make an offer and it was rejected. Later on, come back to the seller and make an offer directly to the seller.
Well,
After the listings expired.
the new buyer broker agreement, if you have the box checked and the number of days after and you've supplied the properties that you've shown them, you would still be,
But it's only limited to that.
that time frame, correct.
But even on the old listing agreement on that front page, it says if after 180, I always put 180 days.
That is this right here, the continued right.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things you're gonna need to make sure, but you, like I said, you have to put a number of days in there and you have to supply a list of people. And you have to do both, can't be one, can't be the other. Can't be blank, okay? I know you all see this, entity sellers, you know, if it's a trust, LLC, anything like that, for the sellers, fill that part out, and when I say fill it out completely. A lot of people just will put names, they won't put the name of the trust, or unless it's completely filled out, it does not count. You will still have to do a representative capacity signature disclosure unless that form, that section is completely filled out, okay?
One or the other?
You mean you can do this and not?
And not do the representative capacity for yourself. So if you fill this out in the listing agreement or in the purchase agreement, you do not need to do the representative capacity. But it needs to be filled out completely, not just the box checked, okay? Okay, here's our purchase agreement. Now 17 pages long. It's kind of like a receipt from the from CVS, right? 17 pages long. So pretty much page one, everything on page one is the same. Nothing really has changed. Page two is where you're gonna see the change. Now, when we talked about concessions earlier, and I said it was broken out into two separate places, you'll see it is in G1 and G3. G1 is a seller credit, if any, to the buyer. So this is gonna be for closing costs or anything of that. And that's where they're gonna say, we want 10,000 in closing costs, right here. And it says, seller credit to be applied to closing costs, or other, you can put in there. Compensation, concession, is different. That is section G3. So G3 right here is where you're gonna ask for the seller to pay for your buyer broker compensation. Now, the reason they separated it out, according to CAR, is because when lenders look at the purchase agreement, they will not hold it against you for paying concessions for compensation against the amount you're getting for credit, because lenders will only allow so much for credit. So CAR is saying that those, if you separate them into the two different amounts, one won't count against the other. So if the lender allows 10,000 in closing costs because you're asking them for 10,000 in commission, that won't deduct from your 10,000 in closing costs. Okay? Does that make sense? Really, that is the biggest change in the purchase agreement. So, let's go to form.
Is the FPPC automatically included on the?
Once you check the box, it will bring the form in for the SP. So this is the form, seller payment to buyer broker. Okay? And basically, you're gonna put in the amount of compensation you're asking for. It also says delivery of buyer representation agreement. Buyer authorizing buyer's broker and its escrow holder upon request to deliver seller or seller's broker a copy of the portion of the buyer representation agreement identifying compensation.
That would be page 5.
That is page 5, okay? So that is exactly what it's talking about.
What was that? Not the whole thing.
What number was that? Right here.
Thank you.
Delivery of buyer representation agreement. So it's talking about the CAI from the RBC. Your buyer is saying, you give it, okay? And this can be countered, obviously. You're asking for that, but when the seller looks at the offer, say you're asking for 3%, and they're like, no, I'm only gonna pay 2%, it's gonna be a counter.
So that would go on the counter,
Not another one of those. It would be negotiated in the counters.
It's just negotiating the counter like any other term? There's
Yeah,
not separate
correct.
forms for that or anything else?
No.
So you can already call the listing agent before you write the offer, like you usually ask, you know, which escrow company or which that can be, and you can
But
see if
they
they.
can verbally tell you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You could.
And that's
They may not be willing to.
Huh?
They may not be willing to. They may just say, write your offer.
I was just saying, in that scenario, from what I'm understanding, you're gonna discuss buyer compensation with your seller during the listing agreement, but there's no spot to put a specific dollar or
because
percentage
it's
that they're willing to.
supposed
So
to
it's
be
gonna
negotiated
case by
with the
case, right?
yeah, it's supposed to be negotiated with the the
So,
first contract.
as a buyer's agent, we're gonna call agents, and they're not gonna tell us you're gonna get 2% or 3%, they're just gonna say,
I would
they're
tell you,
willing to pay
Cheryl,
something.
if you called me on my listing, I would tell you
I mean,
what
as a
the
listing
seller
agent, you
has
want the
agreed
deal
to
to go
do.
together. You want the deal to go together as a listing agent, so therefore, you're gonna work with a buyer's agent,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
no,
let's be
I
honest.
wouldn't have it in writing,
It's in
but
your
that's
best
what we
interest to get
discussed
it.
it. I would say we discussed this and my seller is prepared
correct, when you counter, it got a separate.
for a full price offer. So you won't know till you get it signed, but you have an idea.
Is incorporated as an RPA, therefore you're paying this to the RPA.
Say what?
Of the RPA.
Well, that's what I'm saying. With a full price offer, my sellers agreed to pay 2%. You write it less than that, it might not be as flexible, but I'll, you have to work at it. It's like, I'm still
You're gonna take the other two, and at that point,
But
okay,
yet,
you can counter that, or I'm reducing the price by 10,000 so I can get paid my 10,000. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So why do they say that?
Because now your buyer's gonna be paying the difference unless you choose to take it. Now, this is the one form we talked about when somebody asked about leases, right? I know Huntington Beach does a lot of leases, so there will be no offer for compensation in a lease on the MLS either. Even though this doesn't apply to leases, it's only for single-family residence purchases, there still will be no offer of compensation in the MLS on leases. So you, as somebody representing a tenant to look at a leased property, how are you gonna know what you get paid? It's negotiable. I don't know, I'm not sure because they haven't really said, here's the form for compensation for a lease. There isn't one. So this would be where you can put in and sign a form with your tenant saying how much you want to get paid for representing them in a lease. Okay? I know, but it's not mandatory. It is not a mandatory form, because that is the option you have been given. Yeah.
Going back to the leasing agreement, I'm sorry.
No worries.
So there's nowhere that we're writing down what the seller wants to be compensation for the buyer.
No.
But you do want to kind of have that conversation.
And absolutely, and that's why they include that broker compensation advisory. It is basically a list of all the different ways that somebody's gonna be asking to be. You can. You can. Let's see what comes in. Let's see what they offer. Let's see what they're asking for. Yeah. Technically, honestly, let's be real, they're gonna usually ask between 2 and 3%, and you can say that to your seller. My seller, we're gonna see offers when they come in. I can almost guarantee it that the buyer's broker will be asking you to pay compensation to them somewhere in the range of 2 to 3%.
What about when you're appointing dual agencies and you say someone might come to me and want me to write their offer? You kind of negotiate an amount like.
I mean, it's gonna be the same whether you write the offer or an outside agent does. It's all negotiated in the purchase agreement. So you same exact way. Yep. And do an SBTP asking for the seller to compensate you. Yeah. All right, I know that was a lot. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
I was just gonna say, I don't think it's anything different than when we had a buyer's market back in 2009 and 10. And we used to have these conversations with our sellers that the offers are gonna come in, most likely, they're gonna ask for $15,000 in closing costs.
Absolutely.
So that's, I think, the conversation that I will be having with my clients, saying, yes, this is a new law, but most likely this is gonna happen. And they're gonna request this, especially this new in the state. Be prepared for that, but of course, until we see the offer, we really don't know. And I want you to be prepared for it, that this is what, and this is where experience comes in, and just being, this is what I'm seeing on other houses, or this is what I'm hearing on other ones. And then just negotiate it
Yeah.
at that point, but be
Yep.
prepared for it. I also have one investor who already told me, I'll pay you X amount of dollars for being my listing agent, and if you bring in somebody else, I'm already telling you I will pay you their commission.
Yeah.
So
So-
that's how I took the listing.
It's all negotiated.
Yeah.
So if you took the listing, putting anything to do with buyer broker commission, you have to do the form that we talked at the very beginning, the DMLA, and that will remove it from there. Any verbiage of compensation to a buyer's broker that is in a listing agent, listing agreement on the form that's 1223 or earlier, then the modification will take that out, okay? All of the checklists have been updated. I'm cross-eyed from doing it, so if I did something incorrectly, please let me know, because I looked at so many and I have to do them for each office and each different checklist, so I try to catch everything as I go through. There's no longer a cooperating broker compensation form, so those have all been removed from the checklist. The fair appraisal form is removed because it's now part of the purchase agreement, so that is a separate form that you no longer need.
Can you send us copies of what the new checklist?
I can. I mean, they're in SkySlope. When you create a transaction, it'll pull it up, so, yeah. I mean, it's basically 6 new forms on the sales side and probably, I think, 3 on the listing side.
So 9 new ones, 2 went away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you get 16 more pages of everything,
Right.
so, doesn't matter, yeah.
I remember when the.
Do you have a question?
Okay, yeah, so in a nutshell, like, since it basically starts this weekend for us old folks, can you give me a recap of how different open houses will be, like what we're required to do?
You're not required to have anything signed.
So,
The form that I showed you that has like the sign-in information explains to them that if you would like to use that as your sign-in sheet, you can. Because there's the disclosure on there that states that you're not representing them. Yes.
Well, that would be in your best interest to use it, because then you're getting the names of all the buyers that come
correct.
to
if
your
they tell
house.
you the truth.
If they tell you the truth. I mean,
Yeah,
it's, and that's just how it's always been, right?
Right.
But if you, at the open house, start to have any form of a conversation with someone that's creating an agency relationship, you have to go to a buyer broker agreement of some kind or another.
Okay.
The mini one or the big one.
So the
Doesn't
other
matter.
one I saw that was a little different is on the photography. So it says that, outsiders can come in and take all the photographs of the house that they want to. I mean, they could just come in your open house and just start snapping pictures left
Yeah,
and right.
I mean, that's always, that was in the listing agreement before, that hasn't changed.
But we always had a lot of pictures, so now I'm thinking, I'm never put a lockbox on one of my listings again, I don't do that, I just.
Yes.
So if we have, 2 to 4 unit quadruplex, we use the other form, we don't use the single family form.
Single family listing agreement is actually good up to 4 units.
Right, but if you wanna get away with that, can you use the other form and then you put it on the?
This is required for single family up to 4 units, no matter what. All the new forms are required that way.
So a specific question, on the, with the modification coming up,
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking right now, the counter offers going back and forth.
If it goes into escrow before August 13th, you don't need
But
it.
let's say the counter offers are going back and forth, on the 12th, I have an offer out, or a counter out, if that's not signed on the 12th, the seller has already said to me on the 13th, can we take that compensation up for the buyer, if that's not their offer?
It'll automatically go away.
Right, so that person's just left. Even though we have a counter situation.
Counter is you're in negotiations at that point. I mean, Leo, what do you think about that? If you're in negotiations on the 12th, 13th, and
And that doesn't sound right to me.
Right.
From an ethical standpoint.
I don't
That's
think
why
it
I'm
is.
asking.
I think if you're in
Lean on the side of that.
if you're the listing agent and you have somebody who's written an offer and you're still in counter negotiations when the 13th comes around, now the seller's saying, I don't wanna have commission anymore.
They already have the
How
ulcer.
does that benefit the seller?
They already have no dollar amounts are
Properly, but it's all gonna come down to conversations and setting expectations, where you don't have these problems going forward, you know.
I mean, how did they write, what form did they write the offer on? Yeah.
No, it's happening right now, just a
No,
regular
I mean,
counter form.
just, but
Seller wants
the
to
original
contract.
list, an original offer was written on which contract? The
The regular
724?
purchase agreement, yeah.
The 724 version?
I think so.
So, I mean, did they ask for compensation in the 724?
No, it would be the regular form.
She
Whatever we were using
offered
before,
a
this is still in the MLS.
compensation on the MLS with her original list.
Well, on July 24th, the original RPA went away. So there is no other option. You have to go look at which form and how they filled it out.
Okay.
Right? And at that point, I mean, I'm hoping people are already starting to do their buyer broker agreements because it just makes sense. Yeah.
It just doesn't seem
But
ethical to me to just
still,
all of a sudden,
I
we don't
agree.
have anything.
And, if the deal isn't together, then obviously, then the buyer's agent can include a counteroffer incorporating the SBPP asking for compensation. Right? Because when you do a counteroffer, there's boxes to check to incorporate forms. So if at that point, it's not come to an agreement, then if I were a buyer's agent, I would then do a buyer counteroffer, checking the box and saying the SBPP is incorporated into this transaction and submit that. If, yeah.
That's basically what you need to do, is just connect it at this point.
Exactly, right? That's the way I would see it.
Well, to, make sure we respect everybody's time, let's save questions for afterwards, and those that wanna get out can get out.
Well, it has to do with the form that I think she's missing here.
Which
I didn't
one?
see. The commercial and residential income form.
Commercial is not under this law. It's not under the NAR law.
But it has commercial and residential income form, it's for any residential and above 5 as well, so the form has changed as well, so that's why I'm wondering.
But it doesn't fall under the NAR lawsuit. All today I was doing was going over the NAR lawsuit forms.
So thank you guys for coming, I hope you guys still wanna remain in the business after all this. I'm sure underwater basket weaving sounds a lot better now.
Our attorney always says, if you follow all the rules, you'll never sell a single thing, so.
Got massively complicated for you.
Yeah.
Good luck in your education.
Oh, quick thing real quick before everybody leaves. I am going on vacation. Believe it or not, I am taking a vacation, okay? So just know, I am leaving on Saturday the 17th and I return on the 26th, so I will be gone.
And if
So
you
we'll
don't have
save
her
all of
phone
our
number, I can
questions
call
for
her.
when you get
Yeah. Do not call me.
Do not call me.
I will be checking my emails and all that kind of good stuff, so